He banned me from my own grandson's baptism because my work boots didn't match his wife's aesthetic, yet he still expected me to foot the bill. My son Kevin thought the old builder was just a senile checkbook he could drain dry to fund his fantasy life. He was about to find out that I don't just know how to erect skyscrapers, I know exactly how to bring them crashing down. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know there are still decent people out there. Kevin wanted to play the big shot developer with my life savings, but he forgot the first rule of construction: never build a life on a cracked foundation, especially when your father is the inspector. It all started on a day that felt more like a funeral than a celebration. The wind that morning didn't just blow, it hunted. It was a gray, iron-hard November Sunday in Chicago, the kind where the air tastes like ozone and coming snow. The wind screamed off Lake Michigan, tearing through the canyons of the Loop, searching for any weakness in the masonry, any gap in a coat. The sky wasn't just cloudy, it was a sheet of unpolished steel, heavy and low, pressing down on the city spires with a physical weight. I stood on the sidewalk outside St. Jude's Church. It was a massive Gothic revival structure, built from Indiana limestone that had drank in a century of soot and rain. I knew this stone. I knew its tensile strength, its porosity, how it behaved when the frost heaved the ground beneath it. I pulled the collar of my Carhartt jacket up, burying my chin against the scratchy canvas. The chill found its way in anyway, sliding down my spine like a cold finger. It always does, but I didn't mind it. I was used to it. For 40 years I had spent my life on sites just like this, or on raw patches of earth that would become sites. I woke up before the sun, when the city was just a blue bruise on the horizon. I inspected frozen foundations at 4 a.m. while the rest of Chicago slept under down comforters and dreamed of summer. I checked load-bearing walls. I read blueprints like other men read the morning paper, looking for the stress points, the potential failures. I made sure skyscrapers didn't turn into rubble. My name is Robert. I am 68 years old, and my joints ache when the barometric pressure drops. To the neighbors in my quiet cul-de-sac, I'm just the widower who mows his own lawn on Tuesdays, methodically, lines straight as a surveyor's laser. I drive a 2019 Ford F-150, not for the aesthetic, but because it can haul lumber. It has mud on the tires, real mud, not spray-on dirt for a commercial, and a dent in the rear bumper where a backhoe clipped me in '08. But to the city of Chicago, I am the retired founder of Keystone Development. I built half the skyline. I poured the concrete that millions of people walk on every single day without ever looking down. I have money more than I will ever spend in 2 lifetimes. It sits in accounts I rarely check, a silent accumulation of 4 decades of grit. But I don't wear my money. I don't drape it over my shoulders like a cape. I don't wear Italian loafers that pinch your toes and disintegrate in a puddle. I wear work boots, Red Wing Iron Rangers, broken in, oiled, the leather darkening at the creases, built for work. I value function over form. I value things that last, things that can take a hit and keep standing. My son Kevin was different. Kevin was my only child. He was handsome in a way I never was, symmetrical, charming, and soft. His hands were smooth, like high-grit paper that had never been crumpled or stained with grease. He had never held a shovel in his life. He had never felt the vibration of a jackhammer running up his arms until his teeth rattled. I had made sure of that. It was my first mistake. The mistake of a father who wants to spare his son the hardship, not realizing the hardship is what forges the steel. I wanted him to have the education I missed. I sent him to the best prep schools where they learned Latin instead of leverage. I paid for the Ivy League colleges. He became a real estate developer. To Kevin, that meant he wore suits that cost $3,000. Suits made of fabric so thin a stiff breeze would tear it. He sat in air-conditioned offices with glass walls, looking down at the city I built. He moved money around on spreadsheets, leveraging assets he didn't understand, and called it work. He had married Sarah 3 years ago. Sarah was beautiful, in a sharp, angular way. She was intelligent, certainly, but she was hungry. Not the hunger of someone who wants to build something, but the hunger of a termite looking for wood. She looked at the world as a ladder. She looked at people as rungs to be stepped on, used for leverage and left behind. She tolerated me. Why? Because I was the safety net. I was the silent partner who co-signed the loans when their visionary projects went over budget, because they bought marble instead of reinforcing the rebar. I was the one who cleaned up the mess when the math didn't add up. But today wasn't about business. or so I told myself. It was about Leo. Leo was 6 months old, my grandson, the first of my bloodline to be born into true comfort. I loved him with a fierce, protective ache that sat heavy in my chest, right next to the grief for my late wife. When Kevin mentioned they wanted to baptize him at St. Jude's, the oldest, most prestigious church in the city, I stepped in. I didn't just write a check. I made calls. I knew the bishop. I knew the restoration team because I paid for the tuck pointing on the West Tower 3 years ago. I organized everything. I paid for the choir, ensuring they knew the hymns my wife loved. I paid for the floral arrangements. White lilies, thousands of dollars worth, filling the nave with their thick, sweet scent. I paid for the reception at the attached banquet hall. I arrived at the church an hour early. I walked through the nave, listening to the silence. It's a specific kind of silence you only get in old stone buildings. A heavy, damp quiet. My boots clicked softly on the slate floor, a rhythmic, solitary sound. I walked to the radiators. I placed my hand on the iron. Warm, good. St. Jude's was old, and the boiler could be temperamental. I wanted the air warm for Leo. I didn't want him to feel the chill of the city. Not yet. Guests began to trickle in. These weren't my friends. They were the crowd. Men in slim-fit suits who checked their Rolexes constantly, as if time were money they were losing by being here. Women in designer coats who looked around the room to see who else was there before they allowed a smile to touch their lips. They didn't look at the altar. They didn't look at the cross. They looked at each other's shoes. They assessed the net worth of the room. I stood near the entrance, invisible to them. I was just an old man in a canvas jacket. Part of the scenery, then the heavy oak doors groaned open. The light from the outside spilled in, blindingly white, against the gloom. Kevin and Sarah arrived. They looked like a magazine cover come to life. Kevin in charcoal gray, tailored to the millimeter, his hair perfectly coiffed. Sarah in a cream-colored dress that flowed like water, a coat draped over her shoulders like a queen's robe. She was carrying Leo. My heart jumped. A genuine smile broke across my weathered face, pushing away the gloom of the morning and the ache in my joints. I reached into my pocket, feeling the small velvet box. Inside wasn't a trinket. It was a savings bond for $50,000, a start for Leo's college fund. Real money, safe money. Good morning, I said, stepping out of the shadows and into their path. Sarah stopped. The movement was abrupt, like a gate slamming shut. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. She looked down. She looked at my boots. I had polished them. I had scrubbed the mud off with a stiff brush and applied a fresh coat of mink oil. But they were still work boots. They still had the scuffs of job sites, the history of labor etched into the leather. Then her eyes traveled up to my tie. It was a simple red stripe, not silk, not a Windsor knot, just a tie I'd had for 10 years. Robert, she said. Her voice was cool. It felt like a draft from a broken window in January, sharp and biting. Dad, Kevin said. He looked nervous. He was sweating, a sheen of moisture on his upper lip despite the chill in the vestibule. He kept touching his cufflink, twisting the gold stud, a nervous tic he'd had since he was a boy lying about his homework. You're early, Kevin said, his voice tight. I wanted to make sure everything was ready, I said, trying to keep the warmth in my voice. I checked the heat. The flowers are set. Let me see the little guy. I reached out to touch the corner of Leo's blanket. I just wanted to see his face. I wanted to see if he looked like me. Sarah pulled back. It was a sharp, deliberate movement. A recoil, like I was infectious, like my hands, rough with calluses, would scratch the fine silk of the blanket. He's sleeping, she said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming a whisper that wasn't trying to be quiet but trying to be firm. And we have to get him ready for the photos. Photos? I asked, confused. The ceremony doesn't start for 20 minutes. The priest isn't even vested. The society page photographer is here, Kevin mumbled, looking away, staring at a statue of St. Anthony rather than meeting my eyes. It's a big deal for Sarah's brand, Dad. We need the right shots. The lighting tonight, composition. Brand? I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. He's a baby, Kevin. Not a billboard, not a prop. Kevin flinched. He knew, somewhere deep down, beneath the layers of expensive wool and desperation, he knew. Right, I said, lowering my hand slowly to my side. The velvet box in my pocket felt suddenly heavy, like a stone. Well, I'll go take my seat. Front row, right, where the family sits. Kevin didn't answer. He looked at Sarah. Sarah stared at him. Her eyes were hard, demanding. It was a look I recognized instantly. It was the look of a foreman telling a laborer to dig a ditch in the freezing rain, not because it was necessary, but because he could. It was a look of absolute command. Kevin took a breath. He stepped closer to me, lowering his voice so the passing guests wouldn't hear. "Dad, listen," he began, the smell of expensive cologne wafting off him, masking the scent of fear. "We have a situation. What is it?" I asked, my mind instantly going to logistics. "The caterer? The organist? I can fix it." "No," Kevin said, shaking his head. It's the guest list." "Sarah's boss, Marcus Sterling, is coming," Kevin whispered. He leaned in close, as if confessing a sin, but his eyes were darting around the vestibule, tracking the arrival of a silver Bentley in the drop-off lane, and a few senior partners from the investment firm. "The heavy hitters, the guys who control the capital flow for the entire Midwest." "Okay," I said slowly, testing the weight of his words. "St. Jude's seats, 800 people. Kevin, there's plenty of room. I won't sit near them, if that's the issue. I'll sit in the back. I'll sit in the choir loft." "It's not about room, Dad," Kevin whispered. He looked pained, physically uncomfortable. It was the face he used to make when he'd crash my truck and try to explain it away as mechanical failure. The words tasted like vinegar in his mouth. "It's about optics." "Optics?" I repeated. The word hung in the cold air between us. It was a word that belonged in a boardroom, not a church. "Sarah thinks, well, look," Kevin stammered, his hands fluttering. "We told them that I run the family business, that I built the empire, that Keystone is evolved." He paused, swallowing hard.
"And Marcus. He's a snob, Dad. A terrifying one. He comes from money that predates the Chicago fire. If he sees you in the truck with the boots talking about pouring concrete and load-bearing walls, it breaks the image. It breaks the narrative we've sold him. He thinks we're old money," Kevin said, his voice dropping to a harsh hiss. "Sophisticated, not blue-collar." I stared at my son. The silence that stretched between us was heavy and suffocating. It was heavier than the limestone blocks above our heads.
It was the sound of a foundation cracking, deep underground where no one can see it until the walls start to buckle. "You're ashamed of me," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a measurement. I was reading the plumb line, and the wall was leaning dangerously. "No, not ashamed," Kevin protested weakly. But his eyes didn't meet mine. They focused on my shoulder, on the worn canvas of my jacket. "It's just business. This deal with Sterling, it's worth millions. Dad, if we close this, we don't need your help anymore. We'll be independent. Isn't that what you want? For me to stand on my own 2 feet?" Sarah stepped in then. She had been watching from 3 feet away, monitoring the conversation like a director watching a scene that was dragging on too long. She had lost her patience. "Kevin, stop mincing words," she snapped. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She turned to me. Her eyes were devoid of warmth. There was no family recognition there, only calculation. I was an obstacle. I was a structural anomaly that needed to be engineered out of the blueprint. "Robert, look," she said, crossing her arms. "This is a high-stakes environment. You're curating a specific narrative today. You simply don't fit the aesthetic. You're a distraction. When Marcus walks in, I need him to see success, not maintenance." She took a breath and delivered the line that would end our relationship, delivering it with the casual ease of ordering a coffee. "My wife doesn't want you here," Kevin repeated, parroting her, his voice hollow. "Can you leave? Just for the service and the reception. We'll do dinner next week, Tuesday. Just us. We can grill." I looked at the stained glass windows I had paid to restore, the vibrant blues and reds depicting the suffering of saints. I looked at the pews I had polished with my own hands earlier that morning, smelling the lemon oil I had used. I looked at my grandson sleeping in the arms of a woman who saw family as a marketing campaign and a baptism as a networking mixer. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot. Anger burns. Anger motivates you to yell, to fight, to throw a punch. This was cold. This was absolute zero. It was the feeling of a structure finally settling, the hairline cracks revealing themselves to be unfixable fissures. It was the realization that the building was condemned. I realized then that I wasn't a father to them. I wasn't a grandfather. I was a resource. I was a bank account with a pulse. I was a safety net. They resented needing, and now they thought they had extracted everything they could. They thought they had the sterling deal to replace me. No problem, I said. My voice was steady, calm, terrifyingly quiet. It was the sound of the wind before the storm breaks. Kevin slumped with relief, mistaking my calm for submission. Thanks, Dad. You're the best. I knew you'd understand. It's just for the day. Really, I understand perfectly, I said. I turned around. I didn't look back. I didn't look at Leo. I couldn't. If I looked at him, I might have broken down, or I might have torn the building apart, brick by brick. I walked down the aisle, past the partners who were just arriving, past the photographer setting up his light stands, and out through the heavy oak doors into the biting wind. But that wasn't the worst part. As I reached my truck, parked alone at the far end of the lot, away from the Mercedes and Range Rovers, a woman was standing by the door. She was huddled against the brickwork, smoking a thin cigarette with jerky, nervous motion. She was older, wearing a vintage fur coat that looked expensive from a distance, but up close was shedding and smelled of mothballs and stale perfume. This was Joyce, Sarah's mother. I recognized her from the wedding photos, though I had only met her once. She lived in Florida, or claimed to, and only appeared when there was an open bar or a photo opportunity. She blew a plume of gray smoke into the cold air, watching me approach with eyes that were too sharp, too knowing. Leaving so soon, Bob? She smirked. Her lipstick was a shade too bright, bleeding into the fine lines around her mouth. It's Robert, I said, keys in hand. And yes, shame, Joyce said, tapping ash onto the pavement. Her eyes glittered with something malicious, the amusement of a person who enjoys watching car crashes. Sarah said she was going to clean house today. Didn't think she'd start with the trash before the appetizers were even served. I stopped. My hand gripped the door handle of my truck. The metal was freezing. I looked at her. I saw the resemblance, the entitlement, the hunger. Sarah hadn't invented this behavior. She had inherited it. It was a genetic defect, like a weakness in the concrete mix. Enjoy the show, Joyce, I said. I pulled the door open and climbed in. I sat in the leather seat of the F-150. It was cold, stiff. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The blood squeezed out of them. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, listening to the wind buffet the heavy frame of the truck. I needed to think. I needed to assess the damage. Why was this sterling deal so important? Why were they so desperate to hide me? Kevin's finances weren't a mystery to me. Or so I thought. I co-signed his business accounts. I reviewed the quarterly reports for Keystone Jr., his spin-off firm. He was doing okay. Not great, he lacked the instinct for margins. But okay. He shouldn't be desperate. He shouldn't be terrified. Unless he was lying. Unless the blueprints I was seeing were fake. I reached into the glove compartment and took out my iPad. It was in a rugged, dust-proof case, usually used for pulling up site plans or ordering lumber. But I also had administrative access to the Keystone corporate server. Because I had co-signed Kevin's startup loans, the bank required me to have oversight access. I had never used it. I trusted my son. I wanted him to feel independent. Trust is a structural weakness if you don't inspect it. I tapped the screen. The LTE signal connected. I logged into the First Citibank portal. The screen flickered, the little loading circle spinning. I expected to see a balance of around $200,000. Operating capital, Payroll. Materials. The screen refreshed. Balance. $450,000 in overdraft protection active. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes with my rough hand. I refreshed the page again. Red numbers. Everywhere. A sea of red ink. I scrolled down to the transaction history. Massive withdrawals. $50,000 to Sterling Holdings. $25,000 to Offshore Ventures Limited. $12,000 to Luxury Lease Corp. Porsche Chicago. $50,000 withdrawal. Cash. They were bleeding the company dry. They weren't building a business. They were looting it. They were living like kings on a pauper's budget, and using the company credit plug the holes. Then I clicked on the Collateral and Liens tab. My heart didn't just stop. It seized. It felt like a cable snapping under tension. There was a pending lien on the screen. A lien against my personal estate. The lake house I built with my own hands for my wife. The main residence where Kevin grew up. The retirement fund I had been saving since 1982. All of it. I opened the document attached to the lien. It was a PDF titled Power of Attorney R. Miller. It was a legal document granting Kevin full, unrestricted control over my assets. The reason listed in the clause? Mental incapacitation. I read the paragraph twice. It claimed I was senile. It claimed I had been diagnosed with early onset dementia and could no longer manage my own money. It claimed I was a ward of the state in all but name. I looked at the signature at the bottom. Robert Miller. It looked like my handwriting. It had the same loop on the R, the same sharp cross on the T, but I hadn't signed it. I had never seen this document in my life. Then I saw the notary stamp in the corner. Sarah Miller. Licensed notary public. My hands started to shake. Not from the cold, from a rage so pure, so absolute. It felt like clarity. They weren't just embarrassed by me. They weren't just snobs. They were thieves. They were stealing my life. They had declared me incompetent on paper to steal my fortune. They were using my life's work, every frozen morning, every smashed thumb, every late night, to fund their gambling addiction to high society. If the deal with Sterling went through, maybe they planned to pay it back. Maybe they told themselves it was just a bridge loan, but if it failed, I would be destitute. I would lose the house. I would lose the land. I would be an old man with nothing but a truck and a pair of boots. I looked out the windshield at the church. I could hear the organ music starting, the muffled, majestic sound of Amazing Grace. I once was lost, but now am found. It made me sick. They had invited Sterling to the baptism to show him the family wealth. They needed the backdrop of St. Jude's to sell the lie. And they needed me gone, so I wouldn't contradict it. So I wouldn't ask, who is paying for this? I put the iPad down on the passenger seat. I took a deep breath. The air in the truck was freezing, but my blood was boiling. I wasn't going to storm in there. That's what a laborer does. A laborer swings a hammer. A laborer yells. An architect plans. A structural engineer analyzes the stress points. An engineer knows exactly which beam to pull to bring the whole roof down without getting covered in dust. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the bank, Galkin. That would take too long. I called Elena. I dialed Elena. Elena was the branch manager at First City Bank. We had done business for 30 years, back when banking was done with handshakes and paper ledgers, not algorithms and apps. She knew the names of my dogs. She had sent flowers to my wife's funeral, white roses, not the cheap carnations the bank sends automatically. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. It was Sunday. She was likely at brunch, or with her grandchildren. Robert? Her voice came through the truck speakers. Confused.
It's Sunday. Is everything all right? Elena, I need a favor, I said.
My voice was calm, but it was the unnatural calm of a man holding a live wire. I need you to log into the system. Right now. Robert, I'm at home. I can't just... Elena, I cut her off. I am sitting outside St. Jude's. I just found a power of attorney document. I didn't sign attached to a line. I didn't authorize. I need you to check the pending transfers on my personal trust. The main one. The 1982 accumulation fund. The line went silent. The air in the truck seemed to get thinner. Give me a second, she said. her tone shifting from friendly to professional instantly. I heard the sound of a laptop opening, the clatter of keys. I'm logging into the remote admin. I waited. I looked at the church doors. I imagined the priest pouring the water over Leo's head. I imagined the flash of the photographer's camera. Smile, Kevin. Smile while you loot the grave. Robert, Elena's voice came back, but it was a whisper. It was the voice of someone seeing a car crash happen in slow motion. Oh God, tell me, I said. There is a wire transfer queued. It was initiated 30 minutes ago. It's set to clear at noon when the international markets open for the week in Tokyo. How much? $5 million? She whispered. It empties the trust, Robert. It leaves $42 in the account. I closed my eyes. 5 million. That was 40 years of 4,000 a.m. wake-up calls. That was 40 years of frozen fingers and aching backs. Where is it going? Sterling Plaza LLC, an offshore holding account in the Caymans. Who authorized it? The digital signature says Kevin Miller, she said. He used the power of attorney. He flagged it as an emergency medical liquidation. The system thinks you're incapacitated, Robert. It thinks this is for your medical care. I laughed. A dry, barking sound. Medical care in the Caymans. Right. Block it, I said. I can't. Elena stammered. It's already in the automated clearinghouse. It's a batch process. I don't have the override codes from home, unless there is a fraud alert from the police, or a federal agency. It clears in, she paused. 40 minutes. 40 minutes, I repeated. Robert, you need to call the police. You need to file a report now. You'll get your alert, I said. Just be ready to hit the freeze button when it comes through. Robert, what are you going to do? I'm going to inspect the site, I said. I hung up. I didn't have time to mourn. I didn't have time to feel the heartbreak that was clawing at my throat. I had 40 minutes to save my life. I started the truck. The V8 engine roared to life, a comforting mechanical sound. I threw it into gear and peeled out of the church parking lot, leaving the society page photographer and the Bentley behind. I drove south. I drove away from the Gothic spires and the manicured lawns, down into the industrial district where Sterling Plaza was supposedly being built. The city changed around me. The stone turned to brick. The brick turned to cinder block. The streets got rougher. This was the Chicago I knew. The Chicago of grit and rust. I pulled up to the site on 35th Street. It was a fenced-off lot, surrounded by green mesh that flapped in the wind. A sign on the gate showed a glossy rendering of a glass tower. Sterling Plaza, luxury living redefined. I got out of the truck. The wind was vicious here, whipping dust into my eyes. There was no tower. There was just a hole in the ground and some rebar sticking up like broken ribs, and a single construction trailer. A light was on inside. I walked to the trailer. I didn't knock. I opened the door. The warmth hit me, smelling of stale coffee and fear. A young woman stood up from behind a desk covered in paper. She jumped, knocking over a cup of pencils. Her eyes were red, swollen. She had been crying for hours. This was Alara, Kevin's secretary, the girl who actually ran the company while Kevin played golf. Mr. Miller? She gasped, clutching a tissue. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be at the baptism? I stepped inside and closed the door against the wind. I'm looking for the blueprints, Alara, the real ones, not the ones on the website. She looked down. She was trembling. She was young, barely 25, caught in a machine she didn't understand. I can't, she whispered. Kevin made me sign an NDA, he said. Alara, I said gently, stepping closer. Kevin is stealing $5 million from me in 30 minutes. He forged my signature. He's going to prison. The only question is whether you go with him. She looked up at me. The fear in her eyes broke. I told him, she sobbed. I told him they were wrong. I told him the mix wouldn't hold. Show me, I said. She went to a flat file cabinet in the corner. She pulled out a heavy roll of paper. She unrolled it on the desk, weighing the corners down with staplers. I put my reading glasses on. I leaned over the plans. I looked at the structural engineering specs for the foundation. I looked at the concrete mix ratios. I looked at the rebar spacing. My blood ran cold, colder than the wind outside. These ratios, I said, tracing the line with a callous finger. They're using a 3-1 aggregate mix with high fly ash content. And number 4 rebar instead of number 8. I looked at Ilara. This isn't a building, I said. It's a tomb, Sterling said to cut costs. Ilara whispered, tears streaming down her face. He said the concrete would hold long enough to sell the units. He said they would refinance before the stress fractures appeared. Long enough? I asked, my voice low. 6 months, she said. Maybe a year, then spalling. Then structural failure, and then collapse, I finished. If this building went up, Ilara and people moved in, and we had a winter like this, the freeze-thaw cycle would shatter these columns like glass. Hundreds of people would die. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This wasn't just my retirement fund. This was a death trap. My son wasn't just a thief. He was a potential mass murderer, willing to trade human lives for a seat at Marcus Sterling's table. Did Kevin know? I asked. I needed to hear it. Ilara nodded. He signed off on it yesterday. He said it was industry standard for these kinds of developments. I rolled up the plans. I tucked them under my arm. Go home, Ilara, I said. Pack a bag. Go to your parents' house. You're a witness now, not an accomplice. But you need to be far away from here when the police arrive. She nodded and ran out the door. I walked back to my truck. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. The rage had crystallized into something harder. It was resolve. It was the cold calculation of a demolition expert deciding where to place the charges. I checked the time. 11:40 a.m. 20 minutes left. I dialed Frank. Frank was my oldest friend. We played chess on Thursdays at the VFW hall. He was a bad chess player, but a brilliant lawyer. He was a state prosecutor for the Fraud and Financial Crimes Division. Robert? Frank answered on the second ring. Aren't you at the church? I thought today was the big day. I was asked to leave, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. What? Why? Doesn't matter. Frank, listen to me carefully. I am invoking the nuclear option. Frank went silent. He heard the tone. He knew that tone meant I wasn't asking for advice, I was giving instructions. Robert, are you okay? No, I said. I need to file an immediate criminal complaint against Kevin Miller, Sarah Miller, and Marcus Sterling. Robert, and I need you to flag a transaction happening today at noon. It involves a forged power of attorney and an offshore transfer to the Caymans. Amount $5 million. Frank's voice changed instantly. The friend vanished. The shark appeared. Robert, if I flag this based on a verbal affidavit from you, it triggers an automatic freeze, Frank said, his voice crisp. The Patriot Act kicks in because of the sum in the offshore destination. All accounts linked to them will be locked instantly. Their credit cards, their checking, their business lines. Everything goes dark. Good, I said. Police will be dispatched to secure the suspects for questioning immediately. It's a raid, Robert. A felony stop. I know. This is your son, Frank warned, one last attempt to pull me back from the edge. Once I push this button, you can't unpush it. He will go to prison. There is no fixing this. I looked at the rearview mirror. I saw my own eyes. Tired. Old. But clear. I saw the blueprints on the seat next to me. The plans for a collapsing tower. No, I said. My son died a long time ago. This is a thief who is trying to kill people to buy a Bentley. Okay, Frank said. I heard him typing furiously. I'm authorizing it now. The warrant is being digitized. Give me 5 minutes to hit the banking network. One more thing, I said. What? Where are you sending the officers? To the church, Ogibus. That's their last known location. Don't pick them up at the church, I said. Robert, procedure is, let them get to the reception, I said. Let them get to the banquet hall. Let them think the transfer cleared. I watched a snowflake hit the windshield and melt. Let them make their toast, I said. Let them raise their glasses. Let them think they won. Ruthless, Frank muttered. There was a note of awe in his voice. That is absolutely ruthless. Just efficient, I said. I want them to feel the floor drop out. I want them to know exactly what it feels like to have the structure collapse. Done? Frank's units are diverting to the banquet hall. ETA 20 minutes. I hung up. I didn't go home. I couldn't sit in that empty house. Not yet. I drove to my woodshop. It was my sanctuary. It was the only place where things made sense, where wood and glue and joinery obeyed the laws of physics. I walked in. The smell of sawdust and walnut oil greeted me, like an old friend. The air was still and cold. I turned on a single lamp over my workbench. I picked up a piece of rough black walnut. I walked over to the belt sander. I turned it on. The loud, aggressive hum filled the room. I needed the noise. I needed it to drown out the sound of my heart breaking. I started sanding, back and forth, removing the rough edges, smoothing it down. But my mind wasn't in the shop. It was 2 miles away, at the banquet hall. I checked my watch, 12:30 p.m. The toast was happening now. The transfer had failed. The trap was sprung. The reception was in full swing, a meticulously choreographed dance of wealth and pretense. The room smelled of expensive truffles, and the heavy, cloying scent of the lilies I had paid for, a scent that now reminded me of a funeral home. Crystal glasses clinked with the sharp, brittle sound of forced celebration. Waiters moved silently through the room like ghosts in tuxedos, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than a day's wage for the men who poured the foundation of this building. Kevin stood up. He adjusted his silk tie, the knot perfect, the fabric shimmering under the chandeliers. He tapped a silver spoon against his champagne flute. Ting, ting, ting. The room quieted. The partners turned. The friends paused their conversations about summer homes in the Hamptons. "Attention, everyone," Kevin announced. He flashed his winning smile, the one he used to charm teachers into changing his grades, the one he used to sell condos that didn't exist yet. It was a dazzling, practiced expression, but I knew the muscles involved. I knew the strain behind the eyes. Marcus Sterling sat at the head table. He didn't smile. He looked like a reptile sunning itself on a rock, patient, cold, and utterly indifferent to the warmth of the moment. He cared about the baby only insofar as the baby represented a stable lineage for his investment. "I just want to say," Kevin began, his voice booming with false confidence, "how grateful Sarah and I are to family, to legacy." He looked at Sarah. She was beaming, a porcelain doll of triumph. She squeezed his hand under the table. She checked her phone surreptitiously. 12:05 p.m. The transfer from my trust should have cleared. The $5 million should be sitting in their offshore shell company. They thought they were safe. They thought the bridge was built. "To new partnerships," Kevin said, raising his glass directly to Sterling, "and to the future of the skyline." And Sterling nodded slowly, lifting his glass an inch off the table. "To capital," he replied. His voice was dry, like sand rubbing against stone. Kevin signaled the waiter, a young man named David, who looked terrified of dropping a tray. "Bring the vintage bottle," Kevin ordered, loudly enough for the table to hear. "The 1996 Dom Perignon, the one we discussed." It was a bottle that cost $3,000. A symbol. A victory flag. The waiter nodded and walked to the digital terminal in the corner to run the tab. Kevin leaned back in his chair. He exhaled. The tension in his shoulders dropped. "We did it," Sarah whispered, leaning into his ear, her lips brushing his cheek. "He's gone. The money is moving. We're free, Kevin. We're finally free of that old man and his dusty boot." "I know," Kevin whispered back. "I can't believe it worked." The waiter returned. He wasn't carrying the bottle. He was walking slowly. His face had lost all color. He looked like he was marching to a gallows. He was holding the black Amex Centurion card with 2 fingers, as if it were radioactive. He leaned down to Kevin. "Sir," the waiter whispered. "What is it?" Kevin snapped, his voice flickering. "Just pour the wine, David. Don't make a scene." "I can't, sir," the waiter said. He didn't whisper this time. His voice cracked with embarrassment. The conversation at the nearest table stopped. The silence spread outward like a ripple in a pond. "The card was declined," the waiter said. Kevin laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That's ridiculous. It's a black card. There is no limit. You probably swiped it wrong." "Try it again." "I did, sir. 3 times. The machine, it locked up." "Locked up?" "It says stolen fraud alert, law enforcement hold," the waiter said. He placed the card on the table. The system says the card has been confiscated by the issuer. I mean, I have to keep it, sir. It's bank policy. Marcus Sterling's eyes narrowed. The reptile had sensed movement. He put his glass down. He didn't drink. The air in the room shifted instantly. It went from a celebration to an interrogation room. The background music, a soft jazz quartet, seemed suddenly loud and discordant. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. "I'll transfer funds from the joint checking," she hissed, her veneer of calm cracking. "You idiot. Did you forget to pay the bill?" "I didn't," Kevin whispered back, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's on autopay." Sarah opened her banking app. The First City Bank logo appeared. She tapped a login button. "Access denied. Error code 99 fed. Account frozen by court order." She gasped. A small strangled sound like a bird flying into a window. "Kevin," she said. Her voice trembled. She held up the phone. Her hand was shaking so hard the screen was blurry. "I can't get in. It's locked. All of it." "What?" Kevin grabbed his own phone. He tried his business account. Locked. He tried his personal savings. Locked. "Who is doing this?" Sarah demanded, her voice rising to a shrill panic. She looked around the room, as if an invisible inventor were hiding behind the curtains. Suddenly, she wasn't the queen of the ball. She was a rat in a trap, and the walls were closing in. Kevin ran to the lobby, away from the staring eyes of the investors. He dialed the bank's VIP concierge line. "Welcome to First City Bank. This is an automated message. The accounts associated with this social security number are under federal investigation for wire fraud and elder abuse. Please stay on the line for the next available federal agent." He hung up. The phone slipped from his sweating fingers and clattered onto the marble floor. He picked it up. He dialed one number. The only number that mattered. 2 miles away, inside the dimly lit shop, my phone vibrated on the workbench. It danced across the wood shavings, buzzing like an angry hornet. "Kevin calling." I watched the screen light up in the darkness. I didn't answer. I continued sanding. The vibration traveled up my arms. It felt good. It felt like work. My phone vibrated again. Kevin calling, and again. Sarah calling. I turned the piece of walnut over. I checked the grain. It was smooth as glass. Perfect. I blew the dust away. I wasn't their father right now. I was the consequence. Back at the banquet hall, Kevin stared at his phone. "He's not answering." "Call him again." Sarah shrieked. People were openly staring now. The facade was gone. The narrative was destroyed. Then, a low rumble shook the large bay windows of the banquet hall. The guests turned to look outside. A heavy-duty tow truck had pulled into the VIP circular driveway right in front of the entrance. It wasn't a sleek roadside assistance vehicle. It was a repo truck, grimy, yellow, with a massive hydraulic lift. The driver, a man in a greasy jumpsuit who looked like he'd seen it all, hopped out with a clipboard. He backed the truck up to Kevin's 2023 Porsche 911. Kevin ran outside, bursting through the glass doors into the cold wind. "Hey! Hey! What are you doing?" he screamed, waving his arms. The guests crowded the windows. Champagne glasses were set down. Phones were raised to record. The driver didn't stop. He hooked the chains to the Porsche's bumper with a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. "Repossession order," the driver said flatly, chewing his gum. He didn't even look at Kevin. "Lease is in default." "Default? I paid it last week." Kevin shouted, grabbing the driver's arm. "This is a $200,000 car. You can't just take it." The driver shook him off. "Not according to the computer, buddy. The Grand Tour pulled the backing an hour ago." Kevin froze. The wind whipped his hair into his eyes. "The Grand Tour, me. My dad," Kevin whispered. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. He knows. He looked back at the hall. He saw the guests watching. He saw the Sterling deal evaporating. He looked at the tow truck dragging his status symbol away, the tires screeching against the pavement as they were dragged locked. He knows everything. Kevin ran back inside. He looked wild, unhinged. "Marcus!" he yelled. Marcus Sterling was already standing. He was putting on his cashmere coat. buttoning it with precise, calm movements. His team of investors were standing up, checking their phones, signaling for their drivers. "Marcus, wait," Kevin pleaded, running up to the table. "It's a misunderstanding. Just a banking error. I can fix it." "The transfer is coming." Sterling turned. His face was cold stone. His eyes were dead. "I don't think so," Sterling said. He pulled a BlackBerry from his pocket. "My compliance officer just called me," Sterling continued, his voice low enough that only Kevin and Sarah could hear, but heavy enough to crush them. "Your father filed a fraud affidavit with the state prosecutor 40 minutes ago." Sterling stepped closer to Kevin. He loomed over him. "You forged his signature. It was a bridge loan." Kevin cried, tears spilling down his face. "I was going to pay it back. We just needed capital to start the pour." "It's a felony," Sterling said. "And the blueprints?" "My engineer just looked at the specs your father uploaded to the server." Sterling brushed a speck of lint off his shoulder. "You were going to build a death trap with my name on it." "Marcus, please," Sarah begged, reaching for his arm. Sterling recoiled. "Do not contact me again. If you do, my lawyers will eat you alive. I will sue you for attempted fraud, and I will win." He walked out. The partners followed him like a school of sharks, leaving a carcass that didn't have enough meat on it. The room was half empty. The remaining guests were fleeing like the building was on fire. They grabbed their coats, avoiding eye contact, whispering to each other. "Did you hear? Stolen money. Forged signatures. Trash." Kevin and Sarah stood alone in the center of the room. The expensive lilies wilted in the heat. The music had stopped. The DJ looked terrified, but the fire was just starting. Then came the sirens. Not one car. 3. Blue and red lights flashed against the stained glass windows of the banquet hall, pulsing like a strobe light of judgment. State police. They didn't park. They pulled right up to the curb, blocking the exit. Kevin looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Kevin. For the first time in their marriage, they saw each other clearly. 2 frauds. 2 failures. And they were about to answer for it. The heavy oak doors of the banquet hall, which had opened an hour ago to admit a golden couple, now swung open with violent force. 3 state troopers marched in. They didn't look like the local beat cops who directed traffic during the parish festival. They wore flat-brimmed campaign hats, gray uniforms pressed to a razor's edge, and tactical vests. Their presence sucked the air out of the room. The blue and red strobe lights from their cruisers cut through the large windows, washing over the white tablecloths, the crystal glasses, and the terrified faces of the remaining guests. The room pulsed with the chaotic rhythm of emergency blue, red, darkness. Blue. The music, a soft piano rendition of Moon River, died abruptly as the DJ yanked the cord. The lead officer, a man with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every form of human deceit, stepped onto the marble floor. His boots made a heavy, rhythmic thud, thud, thud that echoed in the vaulted ceiling. He stopped 10 feet from Kevin and Sarah. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than a scream. "Kevin Miller?" the officer barked. "Sarah Miller." Sarah screamed. It wasn't a delicate cry of surprise. It was a guttural shriek of a cornered animal. The veneer of the sophisticated socialite shattered instantly, revealing the terrified child beneath. "No, you can't do this here," she shrieked, her hands flying to her face, smearing her mascara. "This is a private event. This is a baptism." She spun around, looking for an ally, looking for anyone who had the power to stop reality from crashing down. "Marcus," she yelled at the retreating back of her former boss. Tell them who we are." Marcus Sterling didn't even break stride. He stepped through the side exit, his bodyguards flanking him, disappearing into the cold afternoon without a backward glance. Sarah turned to the officer, her chest heaving. "Do you know who my husband is?" "He's a partner at Keystone. We own this city." "Ma'am, step away from the stroller," the officer said, his hand resting near his belt. "Now I have a baby," she screamed, grabbing the handle of the stroller where Leo was sleeping, waking him up with her hysteria. Leo started to cry, a thin, wavering wail that cut through the tension. "You can't arrest a mother. It's illegal. You are under arrest for wire fraud, identity theft, bank fraud, and elder abuse," the officer announced. His voice was a monotone hammer, driving each charge home like a nail. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metal glinted under the chandelier. Kevin stood frozen. He looked at the officer, then down at his own hands. Hands that had never done hard labor, shaking violently. He looked at the empty table where the investors had been. He looked at the floor. "It's over, Sarah," Kevin whispered. His voice was dead. "Dad stopped the transfer. He knows about the blueprints." "Shut up," Sarah hissed at him, venom spraying from her lips. "Don't say a word." The officer stepped forward. He grabbed Kevin's wrist. He spun him around. Click, click. The sound was sharp, mechanical, and final. "Elder abuse?" a woman whispered from a nearby table. It was Mrs. Gable, the head of the church choir. She looked at Kevin with pure revulsion. Stealing from his own father? The shame was absolute. It was a physical weight in the room, heavier than the stone arches. Sarah backed away. No, 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 no. She looked wildly around the room for one last lifeline. She saw her mother. Joyce was standing near the kitchen service doors. She had her fur coat pulled tight. In one hand she held a glass of champagne she had swiped from a passing tray. She wasn't coming to help. She was calculating her exit vector. "Mom?" Sarah cried out, reaching a hand toward her. "Mom, call the lawyer. Call Daddy's old firm." Joyce made eye contact with her daughter. For a second, there was a flicker of something pity. Maybe. Or just recognition. Then Joyce took a sip of the champagne. She looked at the police, then back at Sarah. "I told you not to get greedy," Joyce mouthed. Then she turned and slipped through the swinging kitchen doors, vanishing into the back alley. Family loyalty only goes so far when the indictments come down. The second officer grabbed Sarah. She fought him, kicking and scratching, her expensive cream dress tearing at the shoulder. "Get off me. This is assault." They forced her hands behind her back. Click, click. "Check the baby," the lead officer commanded a female officer who had just entered. "Call Child Protective Services." "Emergency placement." "No," Kevin cried, struggling against the cuffs. "Not CPS. Give him to my dad. Give him to Robert. That will be for the court to decide," the officer said. "Let's go." They were marched out through the main aisle of the banquet hall, past the half-eaten shrimp cocktails, past the abandoned gifts, past the judgmental stares of the few guests too shocked to leave. They were shoved into the back of the cruisers. Kevin and Sarah in the other, separated. The doors slammed shut. 2 miles away, the vibration of the sander died down as I hit the kill switch. The roar of the motor faded, replaced by the heavy silence of the shop. The air was thick with dust. It caught the light from the single bulb, dancing like suspended memories. My phone had stopped buzzing, 99 missed calls. Then silence. I walked to the window of my shop. It was a small, grime-streaked pane that looked out over the backyard. The yard where I had taught Kevin to throw a baseball. The yard where I had built him a treehouse that he was too afraid to climb. I looked at the dark trees swaying in the biting wind. The snow was starting to stick now, dusting the world in white. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was hot and salty, cutting a track through the sawdust on my face. It wasn't for the man in the handcuffs. It wasn't for the woman screaming in the cruiser. It was for the little boy I used to take fishing at dawn. The boy who used to hold my finger and we crossed the street. The boy who looked at me like I was a giant who could hold up the sky. That boy was gone. He had died long before today. He had been suffocated by greed and easy money and the desperate need to be someone he wasn't. The shop door opened behind me. A gust of cold wind swirled the sawdust. I turned around, gripping a chisel in my hand, my knuckles white. It was Sam. The Hammer Russo, my old site foreman. We had poured the foundation of the Sears Tower parking deck together in '73. He was retired now. His knees shot, but he still listened to the police scanner like it was the radio. He stood in the doorway, shaking the snow off his coat. He looked at me, his face grim. "Robert," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke. "Is it done?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from inside a wall. Sam nodded. "They're in holding, downtown. The scanner said it was a scene, Robert. Screaming, resisting. And the baby? CPS took him," Sam said softly. "Temporary shelter, just for the night. Frank is already on the phone with the judge. He's arranging an emergency hearing for you tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. I nodded. I leaned back against the workbench. My legs felt weak for the first time in 40 years. Sam stepped closer. He hesitated. He looked like he was holding a live grenade. There's something else, Robert. What? I asked. What else could there be? I saw Elias at the precinct, Sam said. He was there for a traffic thing, but he stayed when he saw the commotion. Elias? The notary? Yeah, he gave a voluntary statement to the detectives while they were booking Sarah. A statement about what? Sam took a breath. He said he saw Sarah in the office 3 weeks ago. Late at night, I stared at him. Doing what? Practicing, Sam whispered. He said she had a light box and a stack of legal pads. She was tracing your signature over and over again for hours. I closed my eyes. The image burned into my mind. Sarah sitting in the glass office, methodically learning to steal my name while she was pregnant with my grandson. Premeditated, I whispered. Cold-blooded, Sam agreed. She was planning this before the baby was even born. She knew the Sterling deal was a lie. She knew the building would fail. The plan was always to loot the accounts and run before the concrete cracked. I opened my eyes. The sadness was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard certainty of steel. She wanted to bury me, I said. Yeah, Sam said. She dug a deep hole, Robert. I looked at the blueprints of the collapsing tower that were still sitting on my workbench. She forgot one thing, Sam, I said. What's that? I know how to climb out of holes, I said, and I know how to fill them in. I took off my shop apron. I hung it on the hook. I wiped the dust from my face. Go home, Sam, I said. I have to get the guest room ready. I have a baby coming home tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the rocking chair in the empty room that used to be Kevin's. I listened to the wind howl outside, battering the house. The house didn't creak. The house didn't groan. I had built it. It held. I went to the Cook County Jail the next morning. The air inside smelled of industrial bleach, unwashed bodies, and misery. It was a smell I knew from working sites near the prisons. But being inside was different. It felt like being underwater. I met Sarah first. She sat behind the thick plexiglass. She was wearing a gray jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too big. She looked destroyed. The makeup was gone, revealing pale, blotchy skin. Her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray, was greasy and matted. She picked up the phone. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. Robert, she cried. Her voice was tinny and distorted through the receiver. Robert, please. You have to help me. Her arrogance was gone, vaporized, replaced by a raw animal fear. I didn't know, she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Kevin made me do it. He said it was legal. He said it was just a transfer of assets. I'm a victim here. I sat calmly on the metal stool. I didn't pick up the phone immediately. I just watched her. I watched the performance. I picked up the receiver. Stop, I said. Robert, please. The bail is set at... I saw the notary log, Sarah, I said quietly. Elias told the police about the practice sessions. The light box. The tracing. She froze. Her mouth hung open. The lie died in her throat. I have a baby, she screamed, hitting the glass with her palm. You can't leave me in here. I'm a mother. You didn't care about that baby when you were planning a bust-out scheme, I said. You didn't care about him when you were trying to put his grandfather in a nursing home with a fake diagnosis. I leaned in closer. You only care about the baby now because he's your sympathy card. He's your prop. She stared at me. Her eyes narrowed. The mask fell off completely. The fear vanished, replaced by pure distilled hate. You old bastard, she hissed. I hope you rot. I hope you die alone in that big, empty house. I'm not the one in a cage, I said. I hung up the phone. I stood up. I didn't look back. She never loved anyone but herself. And now, she had no one else left. Then I went to see Kevin. Kevin didn't walk in. He shuffled. The shackles around his ankles chimed with a grim, rhythmic musicality against the concrete floor. He was wearing the orange jumpsuit. It hung loosely on his frame, stripping away the illusion of the fitness enthusiast he projected on Instagram. Without the tailored suit, without the Rolex, without the gel in his hair. He looked like what he was, a scared boy playing dress-up in a dangerous world. He sat down on the other side of the glass. He didn't look at me. He looked at his hands that were shaking uncontrollably. He didn't pick up the phone for a long time. We just sat there, father and son, separated by 2 inches of bulletproof glass and a lifetime of mistakes. Finally, he lifted the receiver. "Hi, Dad," he whispered. His voice was cracked, dry. "Kevin," I said. I didn't say it with anger. I said it with the exhaustion of a man who has just finished a double shift. He took a jagged breath. "Is it true?" he asked. "About the blueprints?" Elura said. The lawyer said. She said the police engineer called it a negligent homicide waiting to happen. "Yes," I said. "The mix was garbage, Kevin. The rebar was half-width. The first hard freeze would have cracked the support columns. The first heavy load would have brought the ceiling down on the residence." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. "Did you know?" Kevin looked down. He picked at a loose thread on his jumpsuit. "Sterling said we would just cut some corners to make the margin," he mumbled. He said it was standard practice. He said the concrete would hold long enough to sell the units and exit the investment. "Long enough to sell," I repeated. "And then—" Kevin didn't answer. "You didn't check?" I asked. "You're a developer. You're the CEO of Keystone Jr. It is your signature on the permits. I was busy with the financing." Kevin cried, a sudden burst of defensive energy. "I was managing the brand. I didn't have time to look at every cement truck." "You were busy playing the part," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had been suppressing for 24 hours. "I built things to last, Kevin. I built things so that 100 years from now, they would still be standing. You built things to look good on a spreadsheet for 3 months." I took a breath. There is a difference, and that difference is human lives. Kevin started to cry. It wasn't the manipulative crying of his wife. It was the sobbing of a man who finally sees the wreckage of his own life. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the tears dripping onto the orange fabric. "I'm so sorry, Dad. I ruined everything. I lost the company. I lost the house. I lost you." "Yes, you did," I said, "and now you have to pay for it." He wiped his nose on his sleeve, a gesture so childish it broke my heart.
"What happens to Leo?"
he asked. "I'm taking him," I said. The decision was absolute. "Sarah's mom wants him," Kevin warned. "Joyce, she says she has rights." "Joyce wants the stipend," I said. "She won't get him. I'm raising him," I continued. "And I'm going to teach him to work with his hands. I'm going to teach him the difference between an oak beam and a pine facade." I leaned closer to the glass, my palm pressing against the cold surface. "I'm going to teach him the value of $1 earned by sweat. And I'm going to teach him that family isn't a networking opportunity to be leveraged." Kevin nodded slowly. That's good," he said softly. "He deserves better than us. He deserves you." "He does," I said. I stood up to leave. The metal chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound in the quiet room. "Dad? Yeah?" I paused, my hand on the heavy steel door. Kevin looked up. His eyes were red, rimmed with dark circles. Did you enjoy it? Watching us fall? Did it feel good to be right?" I stopped. I looked at my son. I saw the ghost of the little boy I taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I taught to drive. I saw the stranger he had become. "No," I said. The word was a whisper. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. I looked at the glass partition one last time. I had to demolish my own house to save the foundation, Kevin. There is no joy in that. Only necessity. I walked out. I walked out into the snow, leaving my son in a cage of his own making. The fluorescent lights of the family court were buzzing with an irritating, high-pitched hum. The air was stale. I sat at the plaintiff's table. My suit was old, 20 years old, but pressed. My hands were clean, scrubbed raw to get the walnut stain out. Frank sat next to me. He looked confident, but I was terrified. Across the aisle sat Joyce. Sarah's mother looked like a vulture who had been denied a meal. She was wearing a black dress that was too formal, trying to look the part of the grieving grandmother. Her lawyer was a court-appointed public defender who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. My client seeks full custody, the lawyer announced, shuffling his papers. Mr. Miller is, with all due respect, elderly. He is 68 years old. He lives alone. He has no support system. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked at me. She looked at my file. It is a valid concern, she said. Raising an infant requires stamina. What happens if Mr. Miller falls ill? What happens if he passes? My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was fit, I was strong, but I was old. That was a fact I couldn't engineer away. Your Honor, Frank said, standing up. If I may, proceed, the judge said. Frank turned to the back of the courtroom. Open the doors, please. The bailiff opened the double doors. A line of men walked in. They didn't wear suits. They wore flannel shirts, work boots, and jackets with union patches. They held their hard hats in their hands. There were 10 of them. Leading them was Arthur, my oldest sight foreman, a man with shoulders like a bull and a heart of gold. Behind him was the hammer Rousseau, then Big Mike from the electrical union, then Sal from plumbing. Arthur? I whispered, stunned. Arthur walked to the bench. He didn't bow. He nodded respectfully. Your Honor, Arthur said. His voice was deep, filling the room without effort. I've worked for Robert Miller for 30 years. I've seen him carry beams that 2 men couldn't lift. I've seen him work 30-hour shifts during the flood of '96 to save a basement. He gestured to the men behind him, a wall of calloused hands and loyal hearts. But if he ever gets tired, if he ever needs a break, Arthur looked at Joyce, then back to the judge. He's got an army of uncles ready to step in. We built this city, Your Honor. We can build a boy. The judge looked at the men. She saw the rough hands. She saw the honest faces. She saw a brotherhood that money couldn't buy and fraud couldn't fake. She looked at Joyce, who was checking her watch and scowling at the interruption. The judge cracked a small smile. Custody granted to the grandfather, she ruled, slamming the gavel. An idiot placement.
I hugged Arthur.
I buried my face in his shoulder, smelling the familiar scent of sawdust and diesel. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The winter finally broke. Chicago winters are long and brutal. But the spring, when it comes, feels like a miracle. I brought Leo home that afternoon, after the court hearing. The house felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was loud. It was messy. There were bottles on the counter. There were diapers in the bin. There was a crib in the room that used to be my office. I was tired. My back hurt when I carried him up the stairs. My knees clicked when I knelt down to change him. But it was a good pain. It was the pain of work. It was the pain of purpose. The legal battle was over. Kevin had pleaded guilty to avoid a trial that would have humiliated him further. He was serving 5 years in federal prison. Sarah tried to fight. She tried to blame everyone else. But the evidence, the notary logs, the bank records, the testimony destroyed her. She took a plea deal for 3 years. My phone rang as I was sitting on the back porch. It was Frank. Robert, Frank said. Just wanted to let you know. The Sterling investigation is closed. The feds seized the assets. And we recovered the $5 million, Frank said, plus damages. There's a restitution check coming your way. It's substantial. I don't want it, I said immediately. I don't want their money. It's your money, Robert, Frank corrected. It's the money you earned. I looked at the garden. The tulips were pushing up through the soil, red and yellow spears of life. Put it in a trust for Leo, I said. A blind trust. He gets it when he's 25. If he finishes trade school or college. Will do, Frank said. How's the little architect? I looked down at the blanket spread on the grass. Leo was sitting there. He was crawling now. He was fast, determined. He was holding a set of wooden blocks I had made for him in the shop. Walnut and maple. Smooth, heavy, real. He's learning, I told Frank. Leo was trying to stack a big block on top of a small one. The tower wobbled. Gravity took over. It fell. Leo didn't cry. He looked at the blocks. He frowned. He picked up the bottom block and turned it over, inspecting it. Then he put the big block on the bottom. He put the small block on top. He tapped it with his hand. It stood firm. He just knocked it over because the bottom was crooked, I told Frank, smiling. He's fixing it. Sounds like his grandfather, Frank laughed. I hope so, I said. I hung up. I sat on the porch step. The sun was warm on my face, heating the old bones. I thought about the baptism, the cold wind, the rejection, the gray sky pressing down on us. It was a tragedy, yes. I had lost my son. I had lost the dream of a perfect family. I had to send the people I loved to prison to save them from themselves. But as I watched Leo laugh at a butterfly fluttering past his nose, I knew I had made the right call. I had inspected the structure. I had found the rot. I had cleared the site. I had removed the debris. Leo looked at me. He held up a block. Build, he gurgled. It was his first real word. I smiled. My eyes crinkled at the corners. I got down on the grass, my knees protesting, but my spirit soaring. I took the block. Okay, Leo, I said. Let's build. And this time, we would build it right. This time, we would build it on solid ground. I am older now. My hands are rougher. My heart has scars that will never fully heal. But my heart is full. I saved the future, and that is the only legacy that matters. Thanks for walking this journey with us all the way to the end. With Robert, Kevin, and Sarah in mind, do you think this ending was justice? Was Robert too hard on his son, or was it the only way to save Leo? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice, resilience, and the things that really matter.